Psychotic Break. I'm Kimmy.
And I'm Maddie, and we're going to kick off this episode with a couple of scenarios. All right, serious. Imagine a police officer shows up at your house to arrest you. You don't understand what you did wrong, but you do as you're told and you get in the car. You eventually arrive in a cell in Palo Alto where you are assigned a number, which is your new identity. And you are grouped together with other prisoners who also have different numbers. Over the next few days, you were verbally assaulted, physically harassed, and lost all privacy. You even began to lose your identity. How could the guards be so cruel, so heartless? How could you lose your humanity within a matter of days? You feel even more disheartened because you chose this for yourself.
Now picture this. You have accepted a role to be a guard, where you're given free reins with the inclusion of sunglasses so dark that your pupils were non existent and a uniform matching a regular prison guard. For the next week or two, you will be allowed to demonstrate your perception of prison guards on these prisoners with no repercussions, from openly berating to forcing strip searches whenever you please. You enjoy this power and see no problem, but why is that? Would you normally act like this if it were an ordinary day, or if you were randomly assigned to be a prisoner instead?
We are obviously talking about the Stanford Prison Experiment. And for any of those who don't understand what that is, it's essentially the scenarios we explained for you guys. In August of 1971, Philip Zimbardo conducted a study of obedience to see what makes good people do bad things. And in a group of 24 participants, which were all students, let me emphasize that they're all students, Stanford students, I believe. And they were randomly assigned to be a prisoner or a guard, and they had signed up for this study. They had signed an agreement, but they didn't know what they were really getting themselves into. And at the very beginning of my scenario, I told you guys that a police officer showed up, like an actual police officer, and arrested you. And that's exactly what happened to the half of the participants who were prisoners. Kimmy, you want to talk a little bit about the guards?
So, when designing this study, half the participants, obviously, since there were 24, 12 of them were sent in a random assignment to be the prison guards. They didn't have to deal with the humility of being picked up randomly at their own houses and being taken to the school, the Stanford University, their basement. And instead, they were there. They got to put on these uniforms. They got to take leisurely shifts whenever they pleased with other of the 12. And they were put in a room and told to do whatever they pleased. They could attack the prisoners, they could do literally anything and everything, whatever they considered a prison guard to do, most likely based off of the media, where prison guards will openly hit you with a bat or call you by your number or make you lose, as Maddie mentioned, your whole identity because that's their perception of what power is, what authority is. And part of that was Zimbardo's whole intention was to see if I told these people what to do vaguely in terms of you are the prison guard, will they follow it and how far will they take it?
Definitely. And I'll emphasize that it's not just Zimbardo telling them what they are, it's him literally assigning them roles. And it is the students internalizing what those roles mean, and it's their desire to fulfill those roles naturally. For a guard, it's a little bit easier. You have more free reign. You have that control and the power and the confidence to really do whatever the heck you want. For the prisoners, though, I don't think they intentionally meant to absorb their role. They just absorbed it as a result of losing that power. What do you think?
For sure. And when reading about the study, because Zimbardo's very open about it, because it's highly unethical, and looking back, it's now a learning lesson. They were amazed on how much the prisoners absorbed their role and affected their own mental health. Many of the participants had to drop out because it was so degrading for them. And thankfully, they were allowed to leave, but that was the biggest, I hate to say discovery because it was by such like a vile thing, but it made you wonder why people can turn into, I don't want to say slaves, but super submissive into these roles that they were put in almost a day ago so quickly.
It's wild to think about. And how about you tell the listeners how long the experiment was supposed to last?
It was max about 12 to 14 days, not very long at all, especially because they were being compensated monetarily. So it sounded like a really great deal in general.
Yeah, and you may be wondering why the heck would they even stay a few hours in this, especially for the prisoners. It was a paid experiment. These kids wanted money, and I believe at some point, I think there are three stages to why the prisoners who did stay stayed for so long. First stage, money. They wanted to participate in this experiment for the money, and they didn't even know what they were getting themselves into. And then the second stage, I believe, is they accept the challenge. They want to be able to fulfill this role and they want to be a part of this experiment for science. These are fellow intellectuals and they are probably fascinated by what Zimbardo's doing and want to see what the results are. However, I think the third stage, because it got really bad, I mean, they
Yeah.
didn't even pan out the entire experiment. It ended within a few days when it was supposed to go on for much longer. That third stage of why those prisoners stayed for so long is because they legitimately felt like prisoners. They
Yeah.
fell so far into their roles, and keep in mind, they're completely isolated from their families, from the media, from everything, and they're being treated like they're an object, that their new identity is just this ambiguous number, and they fall quickly into depression and learned helplessness, which is your internalization that you can't do anything about your situation to make it better. I think that's why they stayed as long as they did. They felt trapped.
Well, I mean, I completely agree. Part of the part of it where I see that the prisoner participants did note that they had some autonomy still was when they were able to start a riot. They started a prisoner riot around like day 3 or 4, which is very early on, but says a lot. That started a riot to get them free, to take the power back into their own hands, which obviously would not exist in a real prison system, but it proved that they knew they deserved better. And in the end, they lost and they went back to their roles once it was done. And because they lost so hard, it put them back in their place. Not that there was a place, but back into the role they were assigned.
And do you think that aspect of rioting is unique to this experiment, or do you think that everyone has that sort of displacement when it comes to their role as a submissive versus their desire to have their humanity?
I'm not sure, because thinking about actual prisoners, they don't riot because they know the consequences, which are far more severe and real as compared to in the experiment, where the consequence was, at the time, it didn't seem very intense. It was, they got a lot more kind of crap from the guys, from the prison guards, where they won't be fed, they will be put into those like potato sack things or stripped down completely or yelled at, where that really sucked, and that's why they rioted. But they knew to do more. But at the same time, what people really fixate on is the fact that Zimbardo fell into his role as well as the prison guard, which is really upsetting because, like, a whole side note is, first of all, his wife is one of his grad students, and it was the grad student that got him to stop the study. So, all around, he is a disgusting, crummy guy.
I think that's a fair position to take. I have a little too much respect for him for all he's done in science to believe that, which I guess is inconsistent. You guys know how I feel about Freud, creep. So why is this any different? But I don't blame Zimbardo, to be honest. And it's not that he fell into the role as the guard, he was the warden.
Yeah.
So he was in charge of the guards. He was overlooking everything. And yeah, he did fall into his role. He did feel that he could not stop the experiment, even though these prisoners and the guards were showing really extreme mental states,
Hmm.
either inferiority complexes or learned helplessness versus some sort of power grasping within the guards. It just very extreme cases. And if he had taken a more objective position, he would have seen that this experiment needed to end.
Yeah.
He didn't do that because he internalized the role of overlooking everything, making sure everything goes smoothly. We don't care about the prisoners. We need to make sure that the guards are keeping the bad ones in line. And at some point, I'm pretty sure Zimbardo must have believed, and not just for a second, that these prisoners deserved to be prisoners,
Yeah.
that they had done something wrong and they deserved to lose their humanity. Even if you believe that for just a second, that's wild to think about because all of this was an optional experiment. And the fact that it had such dire consequences really opens your eyes up to the fact that good people can do bad things.
Completely. But is it an excuse for how he behaved? Because obviously now the Zimbardo does do lecture circuits where he explains what I did was wrong. It was a great study in terms of for research, especially on my own part, being able to fall into the role and thinking this behavior was completely adequate, very okay. But at the same time, did it help that much in terms of we understand this? I mean, obedience is a thing. We know we fall into place, but I don't I don't remember if they ever explained it to the fullest extent as to why we can naturally do this, because especially in terms of the prison guards and Zimbardo himself as the warden, where I would like to think that if we were placed into this role and given this permission to almost do whatever we please to the prisoners, some part of us would stop and think, hey, that's not very nice. Maybe I'll just be like, okay, I have the power, you listen to me. It's almost being the manager with your team members, which we've done. You don't become a power hungry, like, dictator.
Yeah, and arguably, power has a lot more control on someone than we like to attribute it to. I do think that the main reason that the guards acted the way they did was a few, I guess you could say, bad apples that there, because I'm thinking about this one guy. I don't remember his name, but he was one of the guards, and he had seen a movie that had shown what prison guards were like. They were
Mhm.
very tough, they were very hard on the prisoners, they were abusive. And this media or this movie just glorified that power and
Yeah.
made them seem like they were doing something right. And for a college student or a grad student, whichever he knows the importance of an experiment and he knows the importance of following an experiment through. So I think it's that pressure in conjunction with his idea of what he should be doing, which is what made him act in that way. Now, somewhere along the line, it's pretty obvious they enjoyed that power. They
Yeah.
enjoyed that power, and that kind of cycle just kept spinning within them, just grabbing more and more power and getting the benefits from it because power feels good.
It does. And that does make complete sense. And it's hard to validate such behaviors because in their scenario, I completely get it. I would hope that no one acts that way, but and maybe it's a male thing where they go off the frickin' rails, but it's still hard to believe because obviously all of experiments that we look on today are ones that didn't have the APA up their butt trying to control is this ethical or not, and just amazing. If we tried this today, it wouldn't be allowed, first of all, but how would people behave, do you think? Do you think in modern day, with how almost social justice and aware we are, would we behave the same way if given all of this experiment one last time with a non-biased party overlooking the whole thing so that it could easily stop compared to when Zimbardo did fall into it?
That's a hard question to answer because I truly believe that experiments like these, Stanford Prison Experiment, Milgram Shock Experiment, those kinds of extreme experiments, they were done at a time where there weren't ethics, as you say. But because of what we learned from those experiments, we now have set the ground rules and we have set a basis, a ethical code of guidelines
Yeah.
to make sure that no one has to feel like that again. Knowing that a good deal of people do know about the Stanford Prison Experiment, or at least know the consequences of good people doing bad things, obviously we would have different results today. I believe that history is a way for us to learn about how to progress forward. We walk forward with one arm behind us because we are learning from past people's mistakes and we're becoming wiser and hopefully more good natured and expressing more social justice, as you said. The experiment would be very different today, but only if that experiment
Mhm.
hadn't already happened.
Yeah, but there will always be people that don't know it because I remember back in psych in our high school years, they made us watch a video of the Milgram shock experiment being performed in more modern times, like within maybe 2010s, and people still obeyed the the fake experimenter that told them to do the controls and to up the supposed shock, and people still did it, and some of them did fall out faster than the original study, but it after seeing that, that almost assures me that if we performed it again today, there would be people that go absolute apeshit in there, or it would be the way where prisoners, knowing that people do have rights and people can stand up for themselves, even when we see it in more developing countries and stuff. If we redid the experiment, there, I would see the prisoners behaving in a more drastic sense to earn their freedom again and to get relative respect from the guards so they're not berated, but more so still almost the submissive versus the dominant, but without the violence.
I could see that. And I have two ideas here. Let's see if I remember both of them. The first one is you had mentioned this in one of our episodes where sometimes you don't know what you're going to do in a scenario. I think we were talking about bystander effect. We'd
Mhm.
like to think that we'd be able to take a stand and be able to put ourselves out there for the greater good, for helping someone else. But when you're actually in the situation, there's a lot of doubt, and there's so many different things in play that make you act a certain way or not. So, with that said, I guess I could see the experiment going the same, guards being horrendous and prisoners having really negative um, internal beliefs and feelings. So, that is a factor.
Oh, did you forget the second?
Give me a sec. I bet I could remember it. I don't know why this keeps happening. I usually have such a good memory. Well, let's start there.
Yeah. It uh well, because we mentioned media, we do have obviously more media now. We have different movies, we have different TV shows, all about different things. And as you said, one of the pretend guards used influence from there. If we had that today, I'm picturing almost the Law and Order, good cop, bad cop going off nonstop. And then you have the show Oz, which is an entire prison show about like all of that chaos that guards would be all over the place trying to take in the character that they've been seeing, which is honest, it would be a nightmare.
It would be. I do remember my second point.
Oh, okay.
My second point is to better summarize what I was saying earlier about people having more sense of justice, being more cognizant. The word for that is awareness. People have more awareness
Mhm.
of the powers of social psychology. And whether you take a social psych class or not, people like to produce it in the media. People like to I think we're entering an age where people are starting to be more introspective, and there's a lot of media out there that shows you how. And once you start being introspective, you can see things from other perspectives. So if more and more people get like that, I don't think the guards would be as harmful as they normally would back then.
Yeah, this is the assumption that everyone does have this hopeful introspection that is hopefully more cognizant of others and their own actions, because you can be introspective but still be awful at times. And I wonder if these people were considered introspective, but yet again, the whole concept of like obedience and power overpowers it.
That is a valid point. And how about we talk a little bit about obedience and power? If y'all haven't listened to it already, you should check out our conformity video. That one is super knowledgeable. I think you and me, Kim, we were really proud of that one
Oh yeah.
because we just like hit all the right notes. I mean, in conformity, where you're obeying or complying with an authority figure or the idea of an authority
Mhm.
figure, which is an interesting concept. And it's definitely very applicable to this experiment.
Yeah, I will agree that although I don't condone this experiment and I don't really like Zimbardo, it did go beyond I mean, well, they were being disobedient, but it did go further than studying obedience. It brought the idea of conformity. How far will you go? And obedience and conformity do kind of intermingle, but it opened the door a lot.
You cut out a little bit for me.
Oh, yeah, you are currently frozen for me.
Oh gosh, technical difficulties. Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Do you mind saying that one more time?
Oh, my pickles. Where did I leave off with you?
You were talking about, well, my question was, how is conformity and power related to the Stanford Prison Experiment?
Oh, yeah, so, conformity and obedience intermingle in terms of you're following a higher power on some level. It's arguable what that is, but you conform because you saw something, you conform because something told you, and that is similar to obedience, where you are being told to do something, so you follow it, and that doesn't necessarily make you submissive in any way. But if this giant power, whether it be money or a person, which it was a bit of both for all of these guys, it allowed them to conform into their roles. It allowed them to obey the rules of the experiment almost. And in terms of, they obeyed the idea that you are the prisoner, this is your role, you are going to be considered the sub, you are the guard, you are considered the dominant. And from there, the power of conformity almost overshadowed the idea of obedience, where you are now conforming to the role, and that's how they got stuck in it, and that's where it became very docile and very toxic. Rather than, I wouldn't know if the experiment was more about obedience rather than conformity.
That's true. We're definitely walking a fine line here. And I'll stress that it really was the idea of an authority figure, the idea of
Mhm.
roles that essentially forced these people to feel like they had to comply. And there were prisoners and or there yes, there were prisoners who approached Zimbardo saying, "This isn't right. I need to leave this experiment." And that was when Zimbardo did the kind of messed up thing of the experiment must continue, that
Yeah.
you are the prisoner, trying to reinforce that role. And just that little nudge in that particular direction was enough to make these prisoners stay as long as they did.
Yeah.
And yes, it was Zimbardo telling them that, but really it was that voice in their head telling them that this is how it's supposed to be. I'm supposed to be fulfilling this role. And it's that little voice that is social psychology. It is either a person or the idea of a person that
Mhm.
influences us. And that just blows my mind that the idea of something can change our actions.
Yeah. Not gonna say we apply our Stanford Prison Experiment to our daily lives, but it makes you want to take that step back and see how much of ourselves are applicable to being to obedience and conformity every day, which I think we've discussed a lot, where life itself is very controlled. We're not living a very special schedule. We're all almost on a very set societal forced routine.
Yeah. And to sort of start to wrap up this episode, I just want to mention ethics real quick. This experiment obviously can't be done today, and I am really glad that this experiment happened, which is not a popular opinion, but ethics wouldn't be. where it is today if we hadn't had that experiment. We also wouldn't have had that knowledge of just how powerful obedience and compliance is in the terms of roles that people have and authority figures. So take that or leave it. I'm pro Stanford experiment when it comes to ethics.
Well, I hope you get the wrap up because I might just go off about how much I dislike Zimbardo.
Well, I kind of want to hear that, but heads or tails?
Tails.
Heads.
Okay.
It is me. Okie dokie. We're gonna do 1 minute, not 1 hour. Today we talked about the Stanford Prison Experiment, which was conducted by Philip Zimbardo to see what makes good people do bad things. The experiment was grounded within social psychology, specifically obedience. And there were two roles, prisoner or guard. And the guards got free rein to do whatever they wanted, and that led to harassment, both physically and verbally. And the prisoners just had a really bad time. They fell into the role of submissive, and they ended the experiment early because they had really negative physiological effects. That just goes to show that power is powerful.
That was so nicely said.
Until the end. What was I trying to say? Power, no. Roles are powerful? I don't know where I was going with that, but power is power, guys. Well, on that note, thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. We hope you liked hearing about our takes on the experiment. There are a bunch of cool experiments out there that we're willing to delve into, so you should let us know which experiment we should do next on this experiment series.
Yes.
And make sure you follow us on our socials. So you can catch us on Instagram at
thepsychoticbreak.pod.
And make sure to check us out on YouTube. Like, comment, share, subscribe. I'm currently the only subscriber to our YouTube. Kimmy, you gotta hop on that. But yeah, check us out on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. We're really putting ourselves out there for you guys. So we hope you like us. We hope you like our content. Let us know. But yeah, thanks for listening. I'm Madey.
And I'm Kimi.
Bye.
Bye.